Before the charts, before the crowns, before the industry knew what to call them, a group built to rule the industry. And years later, after the silence, they are taking the crown back. Because kings don't stop being kings just because the room goes quiet. Before EXO ever stepped on stage, SM Entertainment made a choice that would define the next decade, a boy group orchestrating a modern mythology, 12 members split into 2 units, EXO-K for Korea, EXO-M for China, with each assigned a superpower, each carrying a piece of a larger cosmic narrative as celestial beings from an exoplanet. Their debut teasers was like no others. Over 100 days, SM Entertainment released 23 trailers that felt less like idle teasers and more like the opening act of a cosmic war. They presented the Red Force, a corrupting, unseen evil that sought to dry up the Tree of Life, forcing the 12 legends to fracture their world into 2 parallel dimensions to survive. The industry was skeptical. This high-concept, cinematic approach was far more elaborate than typical idol group introductions at the time. But SM committed with a level of production and seriousness that made doubt uncomfortable. EXO were being positioned as an inevitability, and the sheer confidence in that framing created a gravitational pull. Fans started anticipating the beginning of an era. It was the slow, deliberate forging of a crown that would never be passed. On the 8th of April 2012, the world heard the opening of Mama. Mama opens with Gregorian chanting, a chant in an ancient language, layered over orchestral strings and a bass synth that sounds like it's pulling from somewhere beneath the earth. And by the time the first chorus hits, the song has been ingrained in fans' mind. The K-pop community hadn't seen a debut this aggressive or this expensive in years. Critics who had mocked the 100-day teasers were suddenly silenced by the sheer vocal scale of the performance. Public reaction was split. Some called it visionary. Others initially called the concept overproduced or inaccessible. Digitally, the climb was steep. Mama didn't explode onto the charts with the ease of a radio hit. Yet, the sheer audacity of the debut made EXO a permanent fixture in the cultural conversation. They dominated the physical charts, moving over 100,000 units in an era where such numbers for a rookie were unheard of. It made EXO impossible to ignore. You either respected the swing or you didn't, but you couldn't pretend it didn't happen. While the digital crown hadn't been claimed yet, the foundation of a physical empire was set. EXO would never ask for permission. Mama established a presence, but the year that followed was defined by a brutal 433-day silence. In an industry built on constant visibility, EXO vanished, leaving fans to survive on nothing but the lore of the teasers. By the time 2013 arrived, the hiatus had turned a casual audience into a starved, militant fandom. And for that, EXO returned with Wolf, a song that divided listeners immediately. The track built around an aggressive synth riff and tribal percussion, with the members howling in the pre-chorus. The choreography mimicked Wolfpack behavior, all crouch stances and snapping movements, with heavy eyeliner and leather harnesses. It was polarizing and ridiculous to some, but it worked because EXO sold it without irony. On the 14th of June 2013, the skepticism broke when they earned their first ever music show win on Music Bank. But the momentum didn't stop there. In a stunning 72-hour takeover, they swept the industry's biggest stages, claiming trophies on Show Music Core and Inkigayo back-to-back. Within days, they added a 4th win on Show Champion. It was the physical proof that their high-concept gamble had paid off. EXO started appearing everywhere. Music shows, variety programs, university festivals, fan meetings that sold out within minutes. Their popularity was exponential. Within months, They went from promising rookies to the group everyone was talking about, the group other fandoms had to acknowledge. The media started using words like phenomenon and monster rookies, but those labels felt insufficient. EXO were creating the conditions that everyone else would have to navigate. The throne was no longer being forged, it was being assembled in the center of the industry, and the foundation was already taller than anything else in sight. On the 5th of August 2013, the sound of the entire K-pop era shifted. Growl doesn't sound like Mama or Wolf, it sounds like confidence that no longer needs to prove itself. The melody is simple, it was sophisticated, urban, and effortlessly cool. The music video was shot in a single continuous take as EXO moved in and out of frame with choreography that looked spontaneous but was meticulously timed. The video went viral for the execution. People rewatched it to catch details, to see how the formations never faltered, to appreciate the audacity of filming an entire music video without a cut. It topped major charts in South Korea, won Song of the Year at multiple award shows, and became the first K-pop album in 12 years to sell over 1 million copies. The song transcended K-pop and entered the broader public consciousness in a way that few releases ever do, and EXO became the undisputed face of their generation. This was dominance. The crown was no longer theoretical. On the 15th of May 2014, Chris Wu filed a lawsuit against SM Entertainment to terminate his contract. The stated reasons were health concerns and unfair contract terms. The news broke during EXO's peak, just months after Growl had solidified their position at the top. The media coverage was immediate and relentless, and the narrative quickly shifted from EXO's success to EXO's instability. Fans were blindsided. Some condemned the departure as betrayal, and the fracture lines within the fandom became visible overnight. The group's first concert tour continued as scheduled, but the absence was impossible to ignore. The 12 powers of the EXO mythology had lost its first element, and the narrative of dominance was replaced by one of profound instability. The fracture deepened in June when news broke that Baekhyun was dating Girls' Generation's Taeyeon. In the 2014 K-pop climate, it was a scandal that incited a civil war within the fandom. Once the group's light faced intense backlash from fans who felt betrayed by his perceived lack of focus during the group's crisis. 5 months later in October, Luhan, one of the group's most popular and visible members, followed with his own lawsuit. The reasons echoed Chris's, citing health issues and contract disputes. 2 of the group's main pillars were gone within half a year. The media began to ask the lethal question, can EXO survive this? The answer came at the 2014 Mama Awards. Despite the lawsuits and the dating scandals, EXO conquered, winning both Artist of the Year and Album of the Year for Overdose. As they stood on stage with tears in their eyes, the message was clear. The polished myth was bleeding, but the empire wasn't collapsing anytime soon. EXO closed 2014 with Overdose, a track built on sharp synths and a hypnotic bass line that looped like an addiction. The song's title was about obsession, about wanting something so badly it becomes destructive. And the irony wasn't lost on anyone. EXO was living that narrative in real time, juggling massive success with internal fractures, and the music reflected it. But the cost was visible if you looked close enough. Concert footage from the tour showed members pushing through exhaustion, performing for 2 hours in front of crowds that screamed loud enough to drown out the backing track. The tour hit Seoul, Japan, China, and beyond, selling out arenas and proving EXO's draw hadn't diminished despite the departures. If anything, the desperation to see them perform live intensified because fans knew the lineup could change again. The true test of survival came in early 2015 with the Exodus album. The lead single, Call Me Baby, was released in March as a 10-member effort. The track dominated, racking up 18 music show wins, a record proving the public was doubling down. However, as the trophies stacked up, the lineup thinned. Tao, who was featured in the Call Me Baby music video and early stages, suffered injuries that eventually led to his withdrawal in April. By the time the Love Me Right repackage arrived in June, the 12-member mythology was officially dead. The cosmic narrative about 12 powers and perfect balance had to be abandoned or rewritten. They stepped into the Exodus era as a 9-member unit, proving that the strength of the group wasn't in its original numbers, but in its ability to survive its own collapse. The throne had demanded sacrifices, and they had paid them. Now they had to prove the throne was still worth holding. On the 9th of June 2016, EXO stopped trying to fill the gaps left by the past and started building a leaner, more dangerous future. Monster opens with a distorted vocal chop and a trap-influenced beat that hits harder than anything EXO had released before. This was EXO stripped down and sharpened, and the message was clear. They didn't need 12 members to rule. They didn't need lore or superpowers or cosmic narratives. They just needed to be better than everyone else, and they were. Their album, Exact, sold over 660,000 copies in its first month, making it one of the best-selling albums of 2016. Monster and its counterpart title track, Lucky One, dominated music shows, and EXO swept the year-end awards despite being numerically smaller and structurally different than the group that had debuted 4 years earlier. Then, just as the industry adjusted to this dark intensity, EXO flipped the script entirely. In July 2017, they released Coco Bop, a reggae pop fusion with addictive summer anthem. This era marked a significant shift in EXO's journey. As the last remaining Chinese member, Lay found himself at the center of a geopolitical storm. Following a dispute between South Korea and China, a Hallyu ban made it almost impossible for him to promote with the group in Seoul without facing massive backlash or legal restrictions at home. In a historic move, SM allowed Lay to establish his own studio in China, and for the next 5 years, Lay became physically absent from the stage. He built a massive solo empire, becoming a mogul and producer, effectively acting as EXO's ambassador in a market they could no longer touch. On the 8th of April 2022, his contract with SM ended, changing his title from employee to family, promising to return whenever the brothers called. In November 2018, EXO released Tempo, a cappella song disguised as a pop track. The verses are built almost entirely on vocal layering, with each member's voice stacked and interwoven to create harmony. The album Don't Mess Up My Tempo became EXO's 5th consecutive album to sell over 1 million copies, and Tempo earned them another round of music show wins and year-end awards. 1 month later, they delivered the lethal encore, Love Shot.
Yeah.
If Tempo was a demonstration of skill, Love Shot was a demonstration of lethal charisma. The choreography, defined by the iconic gun-loading movement, became an immediate cultural staple, ensuring the group's image remained burned into the public consciousness. Together, these releases made them the first quintuple million sellers of the modern era. But the achievement was more than numerical. It was the final image of EXO at full power. Mature, flawless, and operating at a level most never reach. Just a group at the absolute peak of their abilities, delivering one last harmonic and visual siege before the silence of enlistment began. And that silence was coming, whether anyone was ready for it or not. On the 7th of May 2019, Seungmin enlisted in the South Korean military. He was the first, but everyone knew he wouldn't be the last. One by one, the remaining members followed. D.O. in July 2019, Suho and Chen in 2020, Chanyeol and Baekhyun in 2021. The gap between group activities stretched from months to years, and EXO, the group that had dominated Korean music for nearly a decade, went dark. No comebacks, concerts, or group appearances. Newer groups debuted and rose to prominence during EXO's hiatus, and the narrative around K-pop's hierarchy shifted. Fourth-generation groups claimed momentum, pulled massive numbers on streaming platforms, and built fandoms that had never experienced EXO's peak. To them, EXO were legacy, history, something older fans talked about with nostalgia. The media began framing EXO in past tense, using phrases like "during their era" and "back when," and the slow creep of irrelevance felt more dangerous than any rivalry ever had. But forgetting wasn't the same as disappearing. EXO-Ls didn't move on. Never. They waited. Streaming numbers for old releases stayed consistent. Anniversary hashtags trended globally every April 8th. Fan projects continued. Fan accounts stayed active. And the community that had been built during EXO's peak refused to disband just because the group was on pause. The question wasn't whether the fans were still there. The question was whether EXO would return to a world that had already moved past them, and whether they'd still have the strength to reclaim what had been left behind. While the group name went quiet, the members did not. They executed a strategic diversification of power. Baekhyun released solo albums that shattered 28-year-old records, becoming the first Korean soloist to achieve multiple million-seller milestones. Dio transitioned into the cinematic landscape, earning critical acclaim in films like The Moon and proving he was no longer an idle actor, but a legitimate pillar of the industry. Kai redefined solo performance with a sensual R&B artistry that peaked with the global viral dominance of Rover, while Chen and Suho anchored the group's vocal legacy in the ballad and rock-pop genres. This solo success did something unexpected. It kept EXO relevant without requiring the group to exist. Every chart-topping album and every award-winning film premiere reminded the public that these were artists expanding, thriving, and operating at a level that didn't require the group name for validation. The power they held individually was a terrifying hint of what they would be capable of if they ever returned to a single formation. Don't Fight the Feeling arrived during the darkest years of the enlistment cycle, and its strategy reflected that fractured reality. Only 7 members participated. The song was aggressively optimistic, built on a funky guitar riff and a disco beat designed to counteract the weight of the hiatus. The song charted, the album sold, and EXO-Ls supported it with the same intensity they brought to every release. Despite the fragmented lineup and the lack of traditional promotions, EXO was still a group, still capable of releasing material, still legally and contractually bound together. Disbandment wasn't happening, but the release also made it clear that partial lineups weren't enough. 5 members couldn't carry the weight the same way 9 could, and 9 couldn't do what 12 once did. The song was a holding pattern, and holding patterns don't build momentum. They just delay the inevitable question. When the members all return, what will EXO actually be? By 2023, the media used EXO as a benchmark for history, a respectful way of saying EXO was no longer a threat. The industry had moved on to a new generation, and the silence from the group felt like a surrender. This was compounded by a final, sudden blow. Just as a full group comeback was within reach, Kai was forced to enlist in May 2023 with only a week's notice due to abrupt changes in military regulations. His service began several months earlier than anticipated, preventing him from joining the group's long-awaited promotions. Even as the final members served, the foundation held, with a loyal fandom that refused to let the fire die. And as of January 2026, the era of absence is over. With Kai's discharge in February 2025 and Sehun's in September, every member is finally a civilian again, returning to a world that had been holding its breath. In 2026, EXO is no longer a historical reference point. They are back on the throne, proving that the crown was waiting for the kings to return. The announcement arrived without warning in December 2025, but the impact landed on the 19th of January 2026. EXO was returning with a full-scale project. REVERXE. The name was a deliberate return to the high fantasy mythology and superpower lore that had once made them untouchable. The standout title track, Crown, is a powerful industrial dance anthem that blends distortion with heavy metal riffs. The rest of the project includes Back It Up, Suffocate, Moonlight Shadows, Back Pocket, Touch and Go, Flatline, and I'm Home. The response was a global mobilization that defied every industry prediction. EXO, who had spent years guarding an empty throne, moved with a crazy intensity, dominating digital charts and coordinated physical sales that shattered the legacy group's ceiling. As the first day's sales reached over 265,000 copies on the Hanteo chart, the industry realized its mistake. They had mistaken silence for disappearance. The crown wasn't being reclaimed by the group alone. It was being handed back by a fandom that had refused to let anyone else wear it. The people who had forgotten were being reminded that EXO never asks for permission. They take, and they take with an army behind them. This story was never about 12 becoming 9 or 9 becoming 6. It was about what remains when everything that can be taken away is taken away, and whether what's left is still worth the wait. EXO lost people they started with. They lost years to mandatory service. They lost the industry's attention while newer groups rose and claimed the spaces they used to occupy. They could have let it go. We couldn't have blamed them either. Most groups don't survive what EXO survived. Most don't come back after that kind of absence. The members who remained didn't stay because of contracts or obligations. They stayed because the crown still meant something to them, even when the world stopped caring whether they wore it. For EXO, the wait wasn't easy. It really wasn't. The industry moved on, the media wrote EXO off, and the fans refused to accept either narrative. They waited because they believed the story wasn't finished, and they were right. The crown was held in trust by the people who refused to forget what EXO had been and what they still could be. The victory of REVERXE is hard-won and bittersweet, as the group navigates a complex legal divide that has left Chen, Baekhyun, and Seomin on the sidelines. Yet, even with 3 empty seats, the remaining 6 stand as a shield for the name, proving that the crown is held not just by numbers, but by the will to stay. There's a detail worth mentioning. On the 11th of April 2026, EXO is scheduled to perform at KSPO Dome in Seoul for their first full group concert since the Eclipse. April 12 is Sehun's birthday, the youngest member, the maknae who debuted at 18 and will stand on that stage at 32, surrounded by the people who waited and the members who stayed. It's a small thing, a coincidence of timing, but it captures something true about what this entire story has been. The wait ends not with grand declarations or symbolic gestures, but with presence. 6 members on stage, EXO in the crowd, and their music playing in the background. The crown was never abandoned. It was just waiting for the right hands to pick it back up. And those hands are ready now. EXO dared to be bold. Will you?